Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special video. I am very happy to be joined by a fellow creator in the Daggerheart compatible community gaming license space. And we're going to have a quick chat about a project that he's working on. So if you don't know me, my name is Mike. I use they and he pronouns. I was an additional designer on Daggerheart, but all the videos I do here on my channel are just my own perspective and talking to other people, getting their perspective on the game. This doesn't represent Darrington Press or Critical Role or anything. These are all stuff that I do off on my own. We're just talking about the game and creating for the game as people using this community license. So today I'm very pleased to be joined by the Welsh DM, who is a TTRPG designer and content creator from South Wales, who believes in giving people the tools they need to keep telling stories, which is a fantastic goal. Gethan, thanks so much for joining me in the chat.
Thanks for having me. Really excited to talk about Daggerheart.
Yeah, and so I wanted to start because a lot of people like knowing kind of where folks are coming from, and there's been a bunch of discussions about people coming to Daggerheart. Are they coming from fantasy RPGs? Are they coming from kind of a longer tradition of RPGs? And so I'd love to hear at least a little bit about your road into TTRPGs and kind of what the journey has been like for you.
Yeah. So my first experience of TTRPGs, I was 12, just starting senior school or high school for the Americans, and was introduced to an English teacher by the name of Mr. Walmsley, who I've recently found out is also on YouTube. So that's fun.
Nice.
Um, and he was doing Warhammer and D&D, and that was my first experience of D&D back in the 3.5 edition era. And yeah, spent 4 or 5 years playing D&D with him as my GM. He left. I then picked up the mantle and was a very bad DM for a while, as most people are when they get going with a bunch of their mates who are teenagers. And then just kind of dabbled in and out of D&D for a while, before eventually kind of picking it back up in earnest in university, kind of at the end of the fourth edition era into the start of fifth edition. And then what really took off for me was COVID. I was sitting at home with not much to do, was playing D&D with my friends, and started to think a lot more about the game and started to think about what I would do differently about the game. Started questioning the nature of D&D and like what else was out there, and finding stuff like Pathfinder and Powered by the Apocalypse and those sort of games. And before long, I was designing stuff, releasing it on the DMs Guild, and surrounded by a bunch of other creators online, and learning about the wonderful side of the hobby that is a designer.
Yeah. And so a follow-up question I'm curious about whether this has changed or not in terms of talking about Daggerheart versus other games. I'm curious about your experiences kind of evangelizing or talking up games that are kind of outside of the D&D space, like the D&D family of games. Like
Yeah.
before Daggerheart, is Daggerheart reacting or connecting with people in a different way? Or what's kind of been your approach and experience with that in general?
So the thing with Daggerheart that it gave me that D&D and the other kind of D20 systems didn't give me is it felt like it was so focused on narrative and
Mhm.
wanting the system to enable storytelling, which as I'd progressed through my GMing side, especially, that's what I became obsessed with. I wanted to tell fun stories with my friends. And D&D still for a long time felt like a combat game, and it was very good at it. But Daggerheart came out, and when you heard like Spencer Stark and Rowan talking about it, being like, we want you to tell great stories. And something that I particularly love is when systems disappear. You don't want the system to become irrelevant, but the system kind of fades into the background and just lets you tell the story that you're telling. And that's what Daggerheart always seemed to do. It's just like, we want to get out of your way to let you tell the story that you're telling.
Yeah, fantastic. So we're here today because you're in the middle of a crowdfunding campaign as of right now, kind of funded, working on some stretch goals. It's called Wondrous Environments. Just to kind of time check here. Currently, I see it at 2,332 GBP or $3,161 USD. So I'd love to hear kind of whatever pitch you want to give about Wondrous Environments and kind of um, what your thinking was in terms of selecting this as the thing you wanted to put out into the world first for crowdfunding.
Yeah, so Wondrous Environments is taking the premise of environments that are in Daggerheart, and I will talk about them in a second because I love them. And basically just seeing what we can do with them and pushing forward again that sense of exploration and joy of finding fantastical places in fantasy. Because as much as fantasy games is about defeating the big monster and being heroes, they take place in wondrous places that can truly spark the imagination. And if you've ever been on, Twitter, Blue Sky, Pinterest, and seen the incredible art that artists are producing of these sweeping vistas, and you think in your brain as a GM, how can I get this on the table in front of my players? That's what I wanted to do. For so long, a lot of like the big name TTRPGs haven't given GMs the tools to do that. And then Daggerheart did. And I'm aware that stuff like Powered by the Apocalypse had similar stuff, but Daggerheart came out with these environment stat blocks. And I think I'd been sitting around talking to other designers in the space about wanting to do a kind of thing like this, of giving people stat blocks that aren't monsters, but are the environments around them and how it affects people. And then Daggerheart beat me to the punch. And I'm thankful for it because much more talented people than me worked on them and developed them and got them to a state where it's a concrete idea. And then I could take these brilliant concepts that I'd worked on for other projects, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, and convert them into mechanical things that could be handed to people that could inspire adventures that aren't inspired by a monster, but inspired by going to a place that the players want to see and experience.
Yeah, and that's very cool because for me as a GM, I feel like creating fantastical locations or wondrous environments is one of the places where I am. It's either place where I'm a bit weaker, or it just takes more time for me
Mm-hmm.
to ideate in that way in comparison to other things. And so what part of why I was excited for the project is the idea of someone else doing some of that work, because I know that when I'm, GMing Daggerheart, I'm excited to do some homebrewing because it's, a design style I'm very familiar with, and
Mm.
it's fun to play in that style for me. But that the idea that someone else is like, oh, okay, well, yeah, here's this weird biome and we've got this ice thing, but then here's some other magic thing and here's some cool weird animals and monsters that go with it, right? That is a shortcut that is still really valuable for me, even coming to the game with a lot of experience, because, and I think people find this, that you're more or less familiar with different styles of design. So I'm curious,
Mm-hmm.
as a GM, was thinking in terms of like wondrous environments something you were already kind of like actively doing over the years?
Yeah, so a while ago, as I say, I'd been thinking about doing this kind of concept for a while and ruminating over how to actually achieve it. And then the book that made me figure it out is actually Bigby's Glory of the Giants from
Okay.
D&D. And that book had its own issues, but it had a whole section in there called Giant Enclaves, which was essentially a chapter of locations for people to go explore and describing what was there and the types of adventures that could happen there. And my brain went, oh, that's what I've been seeking for forever. And no one else out there seemed to notice this chapter. I felt like I was talking about it into the void. And I just wanted more of that. I wanted more spaces. And so I started writing with a group of people that I've been writing and designing books for a while now, Runic Press. On their Patreon, I was releasing what at the time were called Wondrous Locations, which is what spun into Wondrous Environments, and it was just places that I'd seen a cool piece of art that I thought deserved to have placed into a fantasy world, or an idea for a place that was in my head and just sat down and write because I wanted people to get inspired. And it wasn't about telling them this is exactly the adventure that happens here. It wasn't giving them a one-page adventure. It was giving them something that inspired them with ideas to then go and spin their own stories with their own tables.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And something that I noticed when I was looking at the preview document is that, and you referenced this a little bit earlier, that this project is kind of iterating on the presentation of environments from the core book and pushing into different directions. And I'd love to have you talk a little bit about that and kind of what you're trying to do in this project.
Yeah, so obviously the stat blocks in the core rulebook are brilliant and a great way of shorthanding to how to get inspired with the prompt questions and the impulses, giving GMs an idea of what these environments are there to do. But I want them. I want more. You see in monster books all the time for any RPG out there, like you get a small like 3 paragraphs explaining the monster's raison d'etre and what it is and why it is the way it is. And I want that for environments. So that's what Wondrous Environments is really trying to do. It's going, right, here's your stat block that you can run, you can take away, use at the table. But then over here, this gives you juice. This gives you the kind of meat to the place that helps you understand exactly what will happen here. And then on the second half of those pages, we're also looking to include literally adventure hooks. So you can look at it and go, these are example adventures that I can take and run that are 2 or 3 sentences long. Again, they're not an adventure in entirety. They're just something for you to go, that's an interesting idea. How can I work it for my adventure?
Yeah, very cool. So, something that I've talked about in streams is like, okay, here's me sharing my process for building environments and the way that I think about them. So I'd love to take a few minutes and get your process and right, we can pull something up, I think you referenced, and I'd love to just have you walk us through the way that you kind of ideated and built out an environment, how you think about using environments when you are writing and designing them.
Yeah, absolutely. I will share my screen to showcase one of the environments we've got on the preview document. Apparently it is disabled.
Let me see if you can try that again.
There we go. Give me that window. There we go. Can you see that?
Yes.
Wonderful. So this is one of the example environments that you can pick up for free on the Kickstarter. Don't have to back it. You'll just get this PDF by clicking the download link. Eternal Observatory. Basically, where this stemmed from is I was writing for, again, Runic Press, where the theme for that month was Beyond the Stars, essentially aberrations and that kind of Cthulhian eldritch horror kind of idea. And I can't even remember the piece of art that I found at the time, but it was like this derelict observatory lighthouse standing out with a starscape behind it. And that just inspired me within that moment of just like, okay, what happens here and how do you connect it into the eldritch nature? And so I asked the question of what happens when wizards look too far out into the cosmos, and what happens when it looks back, and how does that change things? What looks back through the telescope at the people and changes them, and how do they then delve deeper into these mysteries that are whispering in the backs of their minds? And so I built out this whole kind of 1-page document for the Eternal Observatory previously that was very like non-mechanical, like trying to get a gist over to GMs. And so I took that document, which had a bunch of like features and magical concepts, and went, how do I turn these into actual mechanical elements to use in Daggerheart? And one of the things that I was eternally grateful for Daggerheart and its flexibility compared to something like Pathfinder or D&D with its kind of grid system and logic to everything is I could be much looser, which is very helpful when you're dealing with creatures that don't obey kind of Euclidean geometry. So where previously I'd written about kind of like, oh, you can move on walls and stuff like that, you get impossible geometry here and you go, well, this is just always applying to people where the whole environment doesn't make sense. And if you try and make sense of it, it's going to cause you problems. And that playing with, you no longer have to play with people's hit points. You can play with their stress. You can play with their hope. You can play with their fear. Daggerheart gives you a lot more ways to interact with a player that doesn't feel like you're just coming for their physical self. And I particularly enjoyed doing that. So in terms of then like the overall design moving through that, I wanted to make sure that I gave GMs, especially with an exploration one where you're going to be there for a while and players are going to be digging around, you want to give GMs a lot of tools to be able to react to what the players want to do. So obviously with pretty much every exploration one, you've got that passive feature, which is about the players exploring and what's the information you can give back to the players. But I really wanted this one to have that little element of risk because your players are questioning stuff that probably mortal minds shouldn't comprehend. So adding that layer to failures where they can take stress or an enemy appears in response to their madness kind of thing, and just layering on the risk reward element of it, I think is really satisfying, because exploration has long been my favorite pillar, because it's both as a player and a GM to find more out about the world and uncover some secrets and use that to inform decisions is really exciting. And being able to like put that as a mechanical feature to explain to GMs this is the kind of stuff that players can learn, and to entice players with that is really satisfying.
Yeah, and that's very cool for me because in some of the exploration environments in the core book, the that kind of gaining information or gather information oriented passive that you flagged as kind of a common element, I see a lot of those as trying to avoid a null state, right? Where you're giving the players options for gaining information even on failed rolls, but sometimes at a cost. This environment, it feels like the stakes are raised because the the failure results have not just implications in terms of whether you do or don't get information, but also manifestations of the kind of the chaos of the space in introducing an adversary. And I'm curious to hear how that has either played in play testing, or why you wanted to go to that, make that type of move in building this passive.
So my reasoning for trying to introduce this move is what I wanted this environment to do is to really drive the players further into it, like it is drawing them in to some secret deep within, that if they just go one more door or turn one more corner, they'll find out what's at the heart of things. And by introducing a an adversary to that environment, it adds an element of potential to run essentially, and to get lost further in, because they're running away from something that suddenly appeared that's a manifestation of their own fears. Pardon me. And so by able to essentially use the player's own desire for knowledge against them, but to put the opportunity for more knowledge in front of them if they just go a little further, is what I was trying to do with that. And when you consider the successes are like the oxymoron of learning an unknowable secret, which I particularly love the phrasing of, like there is that huge reward that could potentially come from this that could paradigm shift your campaign. And the reverse of that is that you're gonna break a little bit and you're gonna have something to deal with.
Yeah, and if this environment is introduced kind of with a sense of understanding of how this is, this design operates and kind of in line with your storytelling goals, right? You're offering a lot of answers, like kind of
Mm.
dangled like a carrot to players, but then it becomes a question of how much of yourself are you willing to risk, right? Some of the other the tier 4 environment that kind of draws on the chaos realm, right, that I feel
Mm.
like has some parallels in what you're doing with Eternal Observatory, right, has that feature: everything you are, this place will take from you. And so,
Yes.
right, the vibes are kind of along the same lines there, and you're offering something that will ideally pull on a character's motivation, but then present it in such a way that it feels like the stakes are high enough to be worth the potential knowledge or kind of secrets that you're able to gain. And but there's a couple of other features that help around that out. I interrupted you here, so I want to give you
No,
space
no,
to add.
that's my point. Yeah, but that's exactly it. It is putting that carrot in front of them, and not showing them the stick until it's too late, essentially. Um, One I'm particularly, I mean, the last two features on the stat block I do particularly love. One, because changing reality, I wanted to figure out how to make an MC Escher painting in a TTRPG,
Sure.
and uh, it let me do it because you're not constrained by strict structures and placements in Daggerheart like you are in other RPGs. So you can kind of just say the world moves around you and suddenly you find yourself on a wall while your ally is on the ceiling. Um, and how does that affect things, and what new avenues does that open up? Is just it's a good way to conceptualize something that's quite hard to conceptualize.
Yeah, right. And this is example of a manifestation of a GM move that is I think it's one that GMs think of, but may be hard to build into your repertoire if you're approaching Daggerheart and try to like build out a like the full set, like you're adorning your toolkit, right? Changing reality separates the party, right? That's the GM move that is divide the group.
Yeah.
And right, you can see that in the marketplace environment in tier one, but it's the kind of move that can be used across a campaign because it can let you like zoom in on a character, or right then you can vary your pacing moving back and forth between people. And so I'm curious, are you referencing back to the list of example moves when you're thinking like this, or is this just a question of thinking within the narrative of like the fiction of the environment and that it's manifesting or reflecting this range of moves?
Generally, I'm thinking from the aspect of the environment. I'm trying to get my head into that location and what do I think could happen there. I think it was said very early on in like all of the design videos that Daggerheart is quite cinematic in that
Mhm.
you can envision it playing out like a movie, and my brain going to those situations in movies almost what's the movie one with Leonardo DiCaprio, Inception
Yeah.
style movies. Like that's like, how do I get that into the GM and into the players' minds with a mechanical feature? We definitely do then, in retrospect, go back to the core rule books and go, does this make sense with what's already there? What is there anything that we're maybe pushing a little too far out the realms of the system? So we do try and make sure it is all lined up, but where we start with is that point of what's the fiction, what's
Okay.
the in-world nature.
Yeah, and then the last feature here, you've got kind of an instantly activating ticking clock. Tell me more about
Yes.
this.
Yeah. So as I said, this place is incredibly corrupted with the far realm, and it drives people to madness. And just by crossing that threshold, you are exposing yourself to that risk. And so we wanted this countdown to be just looming there in the background to in response to the players trying to uncover things about the world. It is not necessarily going after their seeking of knowledge, which is obviously a completely different role, but it's in their understanding of the space, and that risk of trying to understand something that doesn't want to be understood is slowly going to drive you to something or to a place where perhaps your mind doesn't want to go.
Yeah, and so when you've built this, did these adventure prompts come from an earlier doc, or were they kind of built in later? Like, at what point do you fill these out in the process of building these environments?
So the adventure hooks definitely come last within the
Okay,
whole process. I definitely kind of build out the environment and go, what is the nature of this environment? What are the interesting things that are here? And therefore, what are the things that would interest a player to come here, or a villain to come here ultimately as well? And then from that, you can go, right, here's some ideas that might kind of stack up at the different tiers, peruse the adversaries that already exist, kind of thing, and go, what fits, what makes sense within this space. Sometimes I come in with an original an adventure first and build an environment around it, but generally I'm going environment to adventure.
cool. Right. And so we know that environments have lists of potential adversaries. And in the Wondrous Environments project, there are some new adversaries that I believe are mostly linked to these environments.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear about when you and this team decide this environment needs new adversaries and kind of the process of building those in tandem or testing them and things like that.
Yeah, so what we're aiming to do is get at least one adversary per region or location that we're putting into the book. As you can see, Eternal Observatory currently doesn't have one. We are playing around with some ideas. But we have other ones available in the preview document, like the Winter Wolf that goes with the Boreal Glacier and the Shadow Angler that goes with the Umbral Sea. Um, those we are consciously aware that while Daggerheart is incredible, it had a page limit and could
Yeah,
only put so many adversaries in. And we want to make sure that the environments that we have threats there that correspond to the location rather than trying to take something and twist it and make it work.
sure.
Because as much as these locations are fantastic in their own accord, generally the thing that players interact with the most are an adversary of some kind, whether that is a social or a combat one. That's the interaction that the players will have most. And so we want to make sure that the players have something that fits within the space that they can interact with and deal with to get a better concept of what the space is when they're in it.
And I'm curious how you found kind of designing adversaries toward that end versus any like homebrew you've done for your own games or designing adversaries and monsters in different games.
Yeah, so it's an interesting challenge because traditionally when I go to designing monsters for my home games, I'm thinking about the exact narrative that's already playing out and the threats within that. So I've got a lot of kind of concept around that makes a lot of sense. Well, with this, we're coming in with this environment and going, okay, what lives here? What would make a life here, and how does this environment change them? The winter wolf is perhaps the cleanest example of this. If we take a wolf and ask, what if it's by a place of extreme winter icy power, and how does it change in that nature? And sometimes it's subtle. In the case of the winter wolf, it has the ability to throw out ice shards that explode after a short while of time because it just has ice covering its body. And other than that, it's pretty much a wolf. In other environments, I'm trying to think of some examples that perhaps aren't in the preview document that we've got coming through. We have stuff like ancient librarians for a library that I won't go into, but it's a very fascinating library. And what are these librarians like? Why are they different from a librarian that you would find anywhere else? Why are they shaped by this location in particular? While also we do want to slightly kind of toe that line of like, you don't just have to run these adversaries in this environment. We want it to be like a 75%. It makes sense to run here, but your story might take you elsewhere, and you might still need a wolf that's been powered by ice, kind of thing.
Yeah, that the kind of balance is something that I actually was talking about on a stream earlier this week in terms of seeing a lot of the environments of the core book as trying to be really flexible and kind of mutable to a lot of different circumstances, but that some environments, and I think what I'm seeing in the preview document is a lot of them, and then in the core book, something like Burning Heart of the Woods feels a little bit more dialed into a specific situation or like a narrower, deeper narrative use case, as opposed to something that is a lot broader, and that having a variety of environments across that range kind of gives you different shaped and sized tools for different situations. But again, kind of as I said earlier, it's really, really nice to have those fully formed, more specific use cases so that it's a little bit more like plug and play.
Yeah, I entirely agree. I think you want both. You want the proper noun locations, as it were,
Sure.
that you can put a "the" in front of to fully inspire a concept in the GMs, and then you need those bustling marketplaces and pitched battles that can be applied to many situations that are going to come up in a fantasy RPG.
Yeah. And so, right, as mentioned, the campaign has hit the initial funding goal, working on some stretch goals. You're kind of keeping all of the balls rolling, but you're working with a team, and you referenced Runic earlier. I'd love to hear a little bit more about Runic Press, Runic Collective, kind of how you got working with them, and if there's other stuff kind of in the fantasy RPG space, not officially Daggerheart compatible, but might be useful or interesting to people who are mostly thinking about Daggerheart, but looking for new material.
Yeah, I'll stop sharing
Yep.
for now. But yeah, so Runic Press. Runic Press, I joined. I wasn't part of the initial cohort, but it
Okay.
stemmed out of a book called Babalai Saga's Nocturnes and Nightmares, which was a
Hmm.
Halloween release for D&D 5th edition. I want to say 4 years ago now. It's
Okay.
a long time. Um, and it basically got a bunch of people together from a Discord server and TTRPG Twitter to make a book that some people had ideas from. And it kind of slowly snowballed from there. We released another product. And then I came in with an idea for Vecna's Book of Vile Darkness that we released as a Halloween project the next year. We became a little bit known as like the Halloween guys,
Okay.
releasing kind of dark D&D stuff. But like steadily over time, we kind of grew, brought more people in, conceptualized what we were about. And we slowly I say it in my promo bio essentially of like we realized that what we like doing is giving DMs and GMs tools. We're not here to tell you how to run a game or to tell you this is the way to run a game or we know how to run X style of game. We want to give GMs the ability to build their own world and figure things out for themselves. So we've done a lot of stuff. We've done a heists book. We've done ironically a similar one to Wondrous Environments of just like nice places to go, like out in the Feywild, rather than dark and horrifying that we became famous for. So Runic Press really became focused on that. And I think where it really found its stride was with two different products. The first of all is What's My Motivation, which was a book designed to help people create kind of deeper, more interesting characters, both PCs, NPCs, or if you were just writing a book kind of thing. Yeah. And the short-lived RP magazine, where we were just throwing out articles of ideas to hand people's like random tables of like potions and like alien species for Spelljammer kind of thing, or that kind of setting, and just giving people like a whole range of tools that they might never use, but they might go, actually, that's quite useful, and I can pick that up and go from there. And yeah, really, we're not a company. We're just a bunch of people who found each other on social media, spun up a Discord. We split profits based on what people work on and how much work they do. And it's all kind of very relaxed and calm, but we produce truly incredible stuff because it's all passion projects. It's all something we actively believe in achieving.
Yeah, and kind of across my experience in history, right, working in publishing and being an author, having people that you can do a project with, not feeling like you are kind of just alone in your garret, like trying to make everything happen all at once, can be really heartening. And it sounds like you and the other folks in Runic have found some good relationships and collaboration that you want to be able to keep building on, which is very encouraging and gives you a lot of flexibility in situations like this. That motivation book sounds especially promising to Daggerheart GMs.
Yes, I would definitely recommend it. The other thing I would recommend is they are currently working on, and I think at the point this goes live, it's still preview page. There is the follow-up book, What's My Foundation, that is coming, which is all about world building as well.
Cool.
And I've caught a sneak peek of that, and it looks incredible.
Awesome. That is very cool. The other, like, what I would want to do is just talk about environments for another hour, but I know you're very busy. Yeah. So I think what makes most sense here is to just double check, is there anything else we should know about Wondrous Environments? And just remind everybody who's watching, if they haven't looked in the description, what they should do, where they should go to find the project and check it out for themselves.
Yeah, so Wondrous Environments is just focused on inspiring people with fantastical places, with gorgeous art, and hoping you find places that you want to explore at your tables. If that sounds interesting to you, we have, I think, penciled in 50 different stat blocks, environmental stat blocks, plus then adversaries to go with them that are coming. And if we hit the next stretch goal, we're going to add another 10% on top of that to further expand the book. And then a little sneak, we have further ideas to go with environments that hopefully we revisit in future. It does seem like the appetite is there. I have some further ideas that I may or may not have teased in my own YouTube videos at some point. So go and watch that if you want ideas of what I'm bringing out next at some point. But yes, if that does sound interesting to you, go over to Kickstarter, look for Wondrous Environments. It is one of a handful of actually really interesting Daggerheart Kickstarters that are out at the minute. It is a really affordable book. It's PDF only, so you're not going to have any shipping cost issues or anything like that. As I say, gorgeous art. And if you're feeling a little flush and want to make your own environment, there is a tier for people who want to add something to the book as well.
Okay. It's all very cool. Thank you so much. Why don't you also let folks know where they should go to watch your YouTube specifically, in addition to the Wondrous Environment stuff?
Yeah, so everywhere online, I go by the Welsh DM. So it's the Welsh DM on YouTube, on Blue Sky, on Instagram, on TikTok, on all of those things. Occasionally at conventions in the UK, you will see me wandering around with a t-shirt that says the world's okayest DM, which is a joke from one of my players. And I've since spun into a relatively successful YouTube series. So go watch that if you want to become good enough at DMing, I suppose.
Yeah, and as you said, we all start somewhere. And one of the things that I hoped for with Daggerheart, and think listening to how people talk about it, I feel pretty confident that it is the kind of book that is trying to give a lot of resources to
Mm.
GMs. And I know folks can feel intimidated, that can feel scared, but I want to again encourage everybody, right? Figure out what resources you feel like you need. Take the plunge, trust your friends that you're all going to be able to work together. You don't need to be the world's best GM. You can be that group's most okayest GM, and you're still helping everybody have fun. And so that's kind of what you said you focus on, and I try to provide tools like that as well. So again, Gethan, thanks so much for joining me for the chat here,
Thank
and
you.
I look forward to talking more sometime down the road.
Yeah, definitely. Look forward to
All
it.
right, take
See ya.
care, everybody. Bye.